Just a welcome to everybody. It is wonderful to see so many people here, and we have a treat for you. I'm not even going to begin to describe their biographies. They have such fantastic backgrounds and what they're currently doing. So I will ask each of them to introduce themselves, and then we're just going to go on and have a general chat about pewter and design. Andrew, would you like to go first?
Absolutely. Hello everybody, my name's Andrew Tanner. I'm the Head of Design for Habitat, but have a long career, that sounds terrible, but I have a career before my time at Habitat as a potter, so I'm a ceramicist by trade, worked in the potteries of Stoke-on-Trent, and so very much used to the process of slip casting, which is very similar, as I'm sure Richard will explain later, with the process of pewter. I also have worked in pewter as well, which was great, and that's where I met this gentleman here. We worked out probably in the year 2000. And I'm also the brand ambassador for an organisation called Design Nation, which supports and promotes the best of young British and emerging craft talent from across the UK. So a wonderful chance to be here today, and I'm very, very privileged to be up on this stage to support Pewter Live. So for those of you that are makers as well, I can't wait to hear your stories behind the products, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit later as being so important to what it is that you all create with your hands. So without further ado, I'll pass you down the line.
Okay, my name's Richard Abdy. I work for Wentworth Pewter. We're a pewter company in Sheffield. We've been around since 1946. I've been around for a chunk of that. And it's a family firm, basically. My mum owns the business. I went to work there after university, just while I found a proper job. And 30 odd years later, I'm still there.
Have you found the proper job?
No, still looking for a proper job.
Okay.
Yeah. I love what I do. I love working with pewter. I wish I could actually say I work with pewter. I don't really. I just work with people who work with pewter. In fact, my son calls the place Work with Pewter because he doesn't understand the name Wentworth, and he calls it Work with Pewter, which is one thing I don't do while I wrap it on. But I do know something about it, and I'm very keen that we as a company, as Wentworths, push design and the material working together to produce objects that can be treasured, really, instead of just making these things all the time, which we make hundreds of, and they're very good, and if you want to buy one, they're superb.
I said he would turn into QVC, didn't I, if we'd allowed him to bring his tankards up.
Shopping channel.
Other designs are available, but we make lots of these, but we're very keen to push design and pewter to make other objects, basically, and it's such a wonderful material, and our guys are so talented, and girls are so talented, that we can turn our hands to most things. Talking of lots of variety, I'll pass you over to Angus.
I don't know. Well, hello everybody, my name is Angus Patterson. I'm the Senior Curator of Metalwork at the Victoria and Albert Museum. I've been there, next month it'll be 25 years, which is really shocking because I thought I'd get 2 years on my CV and move on, but the job has expanded a lot. We've recently gone through, I mostly look after historic collections, I should say, which includes the National Collection of Pewter with about 1,500 pieces or so. But we've recently, like lots of organisations, gone through quite a painful restructuring. We've come out a slightly smaller team. And I'm the sole Senior Curator of Metalwork left, and so I'm starting to get a little more involved in the contemporary field because I look after a new curator of 20th century contemporary metalwork. So this is a very good moment for us to review our collecting of metalwork and perhaps to diversify what we've been doing over the last 20 to 30 years. So.
Fabulous. Well, perhaps we can kick off with what your views are.
See, I'm a novice at this. Thank you very much. Perhaps we can kick off with some views of what you think about Pewter Live and how that can help students and indeed people who are already working in pewter to address design and, as you say, move away from tankards perhaps to something a bit more contemporary.
I think that Pewter Live has absolutely epitomised really as to what the talent is across those that are working across metalware. In particular, what's so important is the story behind the product, and we're all very good at storytelling to our friends or where we've been and what we've seen, but we sometimes forget that the product itself can tell such a rich story, and pewter is very much a memory because of how it's manipulated and the marks that it's left. And again, is a rich catalyst, I think, for storytelling. So for me, Pewter Live is encapsulating those stories for the next generation of people to see and learn from, whilst also being inspired by the past. And I think that that was so important when we caught up. We've had a pre-catch-up on Zoom, which we realised that we perhaps spoke for far too long. But we were saying that one of the most exciting parts is the fact that pewter allows you to encapsulate something in time, but equally make it precious. But then there's also that knowledge of it could always be melted down again into something else. And I think that was something that we found incredibly exciting.
Yeah, I've been coming to Pewter Live now since the mid-90s, and the transition that we're seeing is very interesting. The quality of the craftsmanship and the quality of the making is getting higher. People are making a lot better than they were. In the old days when it was more a college-based competition, you'd find you could spot which tutors were good and which technicians were good in the colleges rather than the actual designer as such. But now the link between the designer maker is there and it's complete, and you can see the real quality in what's been made. In the old days it was relatively easy to pick holes in things in terms of, oh, they've not done that seam very well, that's not too clever, they could have taken more time over that, because, you know, with my general knack of knowledge, that's the only thing I could focus on. But in general now, the standard of making is so much higher, and that link between the designer being able to actually interpret what's in their head through their hands and actually making the material is fantastic, and not necessarily relying on middlemen. Helps us a bit as well as a company, because in the old days we used to get phone calls in January or something saying, oh, I'm through to the finals of Pewter Live, I don't know how to make this thing, can you make it for me? And be like, well, we've got our own production to do, thank you very much. But you get arm twisted or you make it for them or whatever, and then you weren't really seeing what the designer had actually anticipated, I would say, because it was very last minute and very thrown out there, and it was our interpretation of what they wanted. But now the fact that people are actually making it themselves and producing to a very high standard is really to be commended, and if that continues, the future's very bright, really, in terms of designer makers making interesting objects of value and of worth.
You mentioned about perfection. Do you find that more craftspeople are using imperfection and the process of pewter in their final pieces rather than the perfection of where your tankards would be?
Yes, and our tankers aren't perfect.
Mine's leaking.
Yeah, is it?
No, I'm joking.
But yes, absolutely. And the material, again, there's only so much you can do with it. It's not a thing where you press a button and out it comes the other end of it perfect every time. So to celebrate those imperfections, that's, to be honest, I'm going to salesman speak again. But when you're able to celebrate imperfections and work with imperfections and the nature of the material and accept the fact that there will be the occasional blemish on your object, whatever it might be, but also then tell the story around that, if that then relates to the making of it, and you can tell a tale about, you know, this is why that's there, because I had to make it that way, or I utilised some tooling I hadn't used before, or I found this. Found objects is very interesting, not so much in terms of I found this is it, but interpreting from old tooling and things like that, where we've been working with some designers recently where they take some of that really old Victorian moulds and things and create something new from them. So that
is seeing the maker's mark something new, or has there been a heritage of seeing thumbprints and pieces, or?
Angus, show us your pictures.
I've got a few things on the screen here. So one of the reasons I mean, just to go back to Pewter Live and what it means for the V&A really is Pewter Live does exactly what the V&A was set up to do, which is it's quite easy to walk into the V&A sometimes, or perhaps look at its history over the last 100 or much of the 20th century in particular, and see it as a bit of a collector's club for connoisseurs, and you were expected really to take some knowledge with you and sort of immerse yourself in the collections, but it didn't necessarily present things in such an accessible way as it perhaps does now. And what we're doing now is really sinking roots much more into our early history. So we were set up for commercial purposes. We were part of the Board of Trade. The Department of Science and Art came under the Board of Trade. And the idea was that we were to provide models for designers and artists to learn to draw from and copy from in order to get good designs into factories. And so Pewter Live is doing exactly that, and I think sometimes we lose sight of that. The museum, I think, I mean, certainly I encourage my colleagues to get involved in these sort of competitions a lot more. But one of the things I particularly like about pewter is the fact that it's soft, the fact that you can leave your own personal imprints on it. And so this is a lovely example of a historic flagon. In fact, I showed Sarah a couple of weeks ago when she came to the V&A. I don't have a picture of the inside of it, but we've got a huge gilt flagon from Nuremberg from 1540 that has a similar thing inside, and it's where the handle has been cast directly onto the body of the flagon. The pewterer has taken a cold, wet piece of linen and pressed it onto the other side so that the hot pewter in the handle on the mould doesn't burn through the flagon. And what it does do is it leaves the pewterer's thumbprint through the linen on the inside of the flagon there. So it's a nice little, literally, someone's thumbprint, someone's fingerprint on a historic object. And so I don't know, I mean, these sorts of things, one of the things I really want to emphasise with our collection is it's there for everybody, it belongs to everybody, it's there to inspire design. And so we do have a certain amount of material on display in the museum, not a massive amount, but we do have a lot in store that is available by appointment. So it is there for you.
Do you have any
other goodies to show us on there?
Well, I can show you, I mean, talking about adding imperfections to things, or leaving imperfections on things, this is something where imperfections have been added deliberately. It's this idea of celebrating the handmade, because this is a classic piece of Liberty's pewter, designed by Archibald Knox. It's got all the traditional sort of Celtic motifs on it. The clock from 1905, and the body of this clock has been cast. And what they've then done is added hammer marks at the end of it to give it that arts and crafts handmade look. And quite interestingly, it's inscribed Tudoric range, which was their arts and craft pewter range, honesty design. When in fact it's slightly dishonest, but it's celebrating that. But it's an absolutely beautiful piece on display in our British galleries. And then I'll show you one more while we're here that might lead on to other conversations, if I can find it. So that is again an example of how pewter is such a soft metal and soft and accessible metal that anybody can have a go at it. Setting up a workshop is an awful lot easier than with other materials because you're dealing with lower temperatures and those sorts of things. And here is an example of what was once a plain pewter tankard that was given to a soldier of fortune called Frederick Baron Trenck, who was imprisoned in Fort Étoile in Magdeburg because he made the mistake of having an affair with Frederick the Great's sister. And he was imprisoned there for some time, and he kept trying to escape. And to while away the hours, he would be given this tin beaker, he described it as, and to while away the hours he used to scratch stories onto it with a nail. And there are about 10 of these that survive because the jailers were so impressed with it, they took it straight out into the town and sold it, brought him others, and they were making a bit of money from it. So there are about 10 of them. It's minutely engraved, even on the inside of the lid, the underside of the base. It's all stories from Aesop's fables. And then the little detail on the left actually shows him chained to his chair because they got so fed up with him trying to escape, and they presumably wanted to sell more pewter beakers that they chained him to a chair. But it ends horribly for him. He becomes a bit of a celebrity in Paris in the lead up to the revolution, and ends up going to the guillotine, denounced as a spy. But yeah, it's one of those odd relics in the collection. It's more of a social history object in many ways, but it's what pewter does is it gives you a material history of a much wider cross-section of the population than you might get with other materials that tend to be focused on in museums like silver and gold.
Thank you. And of course, in those days, that was a contemporary piece of pewter.
Absolutely, yeah.
Getting back to today's contemporary pewter, we've got some lovely pieces upstairs. Richard, from a manufacturing point of view, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about how you work with some people who are not necessarily looking to make huge runs or pieces.
Yeah.
And, some of that.
Well, every case is different. We try and be open. That's the main thing. We've got a policy in the factory of being open, and open to visitors and open to designers in particular. And then allowing, as far as we can, within reason. I always have to qualify these things because, you don't want an influx. But allowing within reason our designers to work directly with our craftsmen so that they work quite intensely together to produce pieces. And then you can see, particularly in a department like spinning, where you're creating a vessel on a lathe, you need to you can tweak the chuck, you can tweak the former that you're working on with the guy who's actually making the piece whilst he's doing it. So you can change the curve here, you can change the curve there, you can just tweak it slightly. And that way you produce better work, really, that you're pushing him a bit, or her in some cases, and you're developing the idea, developing the thing. You can always go back. The beauty of it is there's no such thing as a mistake, it just gets melted down and turned into something else. So we go through an awful lot of design work, an awful lot of processes, an awful lot of trial and error really with designers. And when it does work well, it is when they're working in partnership with our craftsmen. Because it then becomes, when the thing takes off, when it becomes a product that is valuable and is selling, then the guys are making it with pride because they've been part of the whole process. It's not just, here's a drawing, go away and make that, please. It's something that we really missed during COVID, I would say, that we had a few incidents of people sending us drawings, we'd send samples, and they get rejected. We'd have another go and they get rejected. Whereas if they were able to actually be with us in the factory, working with the craftsman for half a day, all that backwards and forwards, and can you tweak this, can you tweak that, that's all gone. And you reach the inevitable compromise, because it's always about compromise. You reach the compromise of production versus your vision, and you get the piece that is viable, basically. It's got to be viable. You can have all the wonderful ideas in the world, but if we can't make it, it ain't going to happen.
Could you do a quick sort of case study of the process of the cocktail set?
So this cocktail set here by Miranda Watkins. Miranda came to us via Pewter Live initially in some respects, in that we had a visit from a group of designers who wanted to see around the factory with a view to entering Pewter Live. We're talking maybe 2008, 2009, something like that. But Miranda chose a different route. So what she said was, I don't want to enter the competition. I want to work with you in partnership. I'll produce some designs. To which I think I said, okay, then send us some designs and we'll have a look. And she sent about 70 or 80 designs. All on sheets of A4, all drawn immaculately. So I don't know how much work she'd done to get to that stage. And we developed a range which we call Gleam, because it was all about the reflections and all about the curves and how the light worked against the curves and how the light worked against the object. And so that was vases, bowls, candlesticks initially, and that did very well. It won the Eureka Prize, and we sold it through John Lewis and a few other retailers as well. Sold very well in New York and Milan, in very posh places where I feel uncomfortable. And it sold well for, the problem with those places though, we've soon found out, what they tended to do is they'd stock a range for a season, and it'd be their big thing, but their customer base is largely the same people. So they come back next season looking for something new when we were still offering the same things. So the next stage with Miranda was to develop barware, because at the end of the day we're associated with barware. So it's a nice synergy there. In fact, she did design a tankard, which was very brave, because our guys have seen every tankard that's ever been done. So it's like very brave to design a tankard. But then part of that was to do this cocktail set, which was actually, we were working on the barware at the time, but it was a nice coincidence because we were approached by, or Miranda was, by Wallpaper magazine with the direct commission to do a cocktail set for them for their vision of their exhibition of this house they were doing, and they wanted various objects in this house for photography. Well, I don't know what they were doing, but they were doing something. It was a long time ago. I can't quite remember. So we developed this range with them, which was a really nice process. It involved a mix of materials. You can see the cork there that's on there. And Miranda, I think I can always remember her being in the factory and sat by Bill, the main spinner, and she was sat there and apparently doing nothing, and she'd been there for a couple of hours and she'd never moved. I was like, oh no, she's getting nothing out of this. She's come up from London on the train, that costs money. Bill's doing something, I can't quite see what he's doing, and she just sat there, and she's not doing anything, but she was watching him, that was the key. So I'd go over and see her, and she's like, are you all right? And he's like, can I get you a drink? You okay? Do you need any help? No, she just was watching him intently to see where he was taking the metal on other objects, nothing to do with her designs. Just seeing where it was going and what he could do, and seeing the limits of what he could do, and then formulating in her mind what she wanted from that, rather than the other way around, rather than presenting him with something and saying, can you make this? So she formulated with that in mind, and then this became this cocktail set. We called it Martini. I don't know if that was copyright, but we did that anyway. And the combination of materials is really good, because she was using the cork to do things that pewter's rubbish at. So the fact that those cups on that pewter tray would have scratched the bottom really easily. So you have the cork there to just protect it. Then we were super honoured by, after the wallpaper exhibition and the publication, when the V&A actually selected it for their collection. That was a really big honour for us. First time we'd ever achieved that, so that was a massive boost. And it's a nice thing.
How important, sorry to interrupt, how important is it for designers and creatives to be on the factory floor? Because that journey of Miranda's experimentation and learning, how important is that for creatives?
It's very important, but I would say the fact, I don't know what, it's a chicken and egg thing really. Initially she came with these 70 designs all on paper, which had obviously been in her head for quite some time, and then she thought, ooh, I can do those in pewter sort of thing. I could find a pewter factory, and then she found us, so we were very fortunate. But on the other, but then she learnt from that process, if you like, and some of those pieces, they're still in production now, we're still selling them, but then she refined her practice by seeing what we could do. And so she had it's a combination, you need the ideas, you can't not. You can't just turn up and think, oh, light bulb moment. But if you do come, you can refine your practice and your ideas to what the guys are able to do, and I think that's it. And the more time you spend there, the better, without interfering with production, ideally.
Do you work with artists as well as designers? So are you finding that there's a move towards the imperfections of pewter that we spoke about earlier, or they're more, I guess, contemporary artists using it as a medium?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the best example, and Angus can help me out with here with a picture or two, is our friend David Clarke, who is a silversmith, who a very well established silversmith, makes all sorts of wonderful silver, but his work in pewter with us has involved him finding pieces, finding very traditional things like this coffee pot, and then actually this one wasn't so much to do with us, but it shows his practice, that he'll take an antique coffee pot, chop it off, fill the gap. And he literally comes into the factory and plays. He's a great one for taking our spout collection, say. We've got maybe 200 different spout moulds that we've just inherited over the years that have come from various factories or whatever. He'll take those spouts and just create vessels from those.
And that's amazing, isn't it? Because what you're doing is you're preserving the past, but you actually are leaning towards the present and the future on how you tell a story. And I think David's work is absolutely, credit to that rich storytelling and how you preserve something, but equally move something on for that next generation.
Could I interject there? Because for me that presents a huge conflict when that sort of thing comes into the museum. We want to acquire that sort of thing because it's really interesting. But the whole idea of chopping a 19th century teapot in half is not what museums tend to do. So this is sort of like become a stretched limo of a teapot. And we've got it on display in our members' room at the moment, and it is a really popular object.
Yes.
And I really like the fact that David Clarke does try and challenge traditional perceptions, but pewter tends to, it has a public perception, I think, that it is a bit mired in tradition, and that, and he's, I think, showing that you can take historic pewter, or you can take historic ideas and just sort of blow them up into something quite witty and quite challenging. And when we show things like this in the museum, it's really, in a sense, designed to get a response from the public that maybe makes them look back at that metal and think again, you know, what we can do with the metal. It doesn't have to be always producing, sorry Richard, tankers. It's a very nice tanker.
And if you are working, how would you, in your...
If you are working, for example, with, you have your design team that
Yes.
you are seeking to expand your range and do things that you are doing, how would you or your team work with, for example, a manufacturer like Richard to produce a piece? You're presumably quite involved in that process.
Very much so, and I think it comes back down to having a passion of how the product is made and that journey from paper to product, rather than paper and then there's a gap, is what you were explaining, and then the product. And I think that you find far more exciting outcomes by really understanding the material that you're working with. And also you get to understand and explore more about the process, and that storytelling then fuels you to be inspired in different ways. And I'm sure that many of the creatives that are in the room today are testament to actually not just having an idea on paper. And I mean, in the olden days, I remember, working with suppliers, and they said, please don't just fax me a drawing, across, please come and see us. And that was a great learning for me, to have that empathy for how a product is made. And that certainly has been testament to my personal journey, because, I mean, I remember working with yourself and coming up to see the factory and spending time in there was probably far more important to me than the actual outcome of the product, because I'd learned to process, and I'd probably got a lot more confidence in what it was that my final outcome was, because I had the enrichment of the journey of the making.
Can I just ask, can you say something also about when you have something that's such a traditional metal as pewter, how you incorporate modern technology into designs and homewares and all sorts of things, where, we talked a little bit before about 3D printing and scanning and does that replace traditional techniques, or does it become part of the process? How has it impacted on the work that you both do?
So for me personally, 3D printing and new technology has opened up a brand new experimental avenue for us, and it's still relatively new. I know, speaking with yourself, that, for example, before we would have to design on flat paper. Now that we've got the opportunity to send across and work with you a three-dimensional piece, and the beauty of pewter, as we know, is that it's a castable metal. So actually you could cast from the actual piece that you've done with a computer to then be made by hand, is an amazing piece of historic journey, because you're using state-of-the-art technology and very traditional craftsmanship, and the two make a very fascinating combination.
Yeah, it is mostly in casting for us. We get models sent to us direct from a designer now, and that model can literally go into a mould and it comes out the other side as a metal piece for us now, and there's no loss of size, there's no loss of detail. The best example I've got for that actually isn't a commercial product as such, it's for the film industry, where we work quite a lot with movies, and in particular ones involving boy wizards, which I can't say which movies they are, but they involve wizards. And I've signed a bit of paper.
Could be any wizard.
It could be any wizard. He could have glasses and a scarf, but
He may not.
he may not. And they literally send the model, and if it does it, and we cast it, and we send it back to them. Say it's a goblet or just a piece of set decoration, and then within days they'll send us another one, because the designer or the director or the cameraman, whoever, it didn't quite work for them. So that speed and that lack of compromise, people don't have to compromise as much, because they can make that change instantly, which is really good. I'm just looking at that. at Teapot there, I'm thinking that might have been a fax machine drawing. I was just remembering the fax machine drawings we used to get where we would make them too long because the machine had dragged it out.
Angus, I think you have another rather photograph, another special piece, haven't you, that you've got at the V&A with the birds and things like that. Perhaps we could have a quick look at that.
Yes, this is another piece by David Clarke. So, I mean, when I mentioned earlier how we're reviewing our collecting policy for contemporary metalwork, we tend to focus so much in the museum on silver, and we want to broaden that a lot more. We occasionally acquire pieces of pewter, but even the pace that we acquire in other metals tends to be led by the pace we acquire silver, which takes longer because it's a lot more expensive. Whereas actually for not many, or for several £1,000s, actually we can acquire a number of contemporary pewter makers and significantly improve our holdings. So this is one of the more recent things that we've acquired. It isn't all pewter. This is again David Clarke having a bit of fun with some ceramic birds he bought from a factory in Germany, and created a new head for one of the budgies, and for the other one he just went crazy with the pewter. And I have no idea how that was made. I'm hoping Richard can tell me, but Richard wasn't sure either.
I'm not really sure. As some of you guys may know better than I do how he did that. I can imagine him dropping it in water or something and then he just did that.
But the idea is with this sort of thing, I was talking about this yesterday, and Trish Woods was presenting a really interesting talk about colour, adding colour to pewter and the way she uses chemical dips and things like that, and how predictable it is what you're producing, and is it a happy accident the way things come out sometimes, and when do you know it's just right, and how tied are you to your initial designs and what your expectations are? And I think with something like that, it becomes a happy accident that it just gets the right proportion. I'd be fascinated to know from other makers how predictable it is when you are working and how much of it is a happy accident. Because like all curators, I can't make anything. We just talk about other people making stuff. The more you can tell me, the more I can talk about it.
I have to interrupt there. You can make things, and I think you made something very special the other day in Fleur's pewter casting workshop.
It's a little shell, and I think probably Fleur needs to take credit for that. So.
I think we have to wrap things up fairly soon, but if there are any questions, then please shout now. Anyone got any questions?
I want to know how, because pewter's melted down so easily, what things have survived? What reason have they survived?
Well, all sorts of good reasons. Let me just quickly whiz back to my first slide, which just gives you that's just a few selections from the V&A's collection. What tends to survive? Often, a huge amount of pewter was made. I mean, there weren't sort of key centres of pewter making, as there may be with things like steel or with electrometallurgy in the 19th century and in Birmingham and things like that. Every town would have had at least one pewterer working away. So most households, even the aristocracy, would eat from pewter most days, and even much poorer families would have a few pieces of pewter in the house. So it was incredibly common. It's like eating from china plates now. So some of it survives simply because of the sheer amount that was produced. Others survive because they've been produced as gifts and heirlooms and things like that. So there are all sorts of different reasons for it. But it covers a much broader range of society than something like silver, and the survival of silver in particular is because of things like heirlooms and then protected collections that have been collected to pass down. Silver, with pewter, it's a bit more random, but huge amounts of sort of tavern pewter survive because just again so much was produced. And our collection, we tend to, we don't collect everything, we tend to collect things that were always seen as instructive for designers and artists to work from, to inspire new works. So we tend to have in the past heavily favoured ornament, but then particularly after early 20th century English pewter becomes very collectible. The Pewter Society is set up in 1918, still going and doing amazing, I mean they do far more research on pewter than we do in the museum. And so what we then did was acquire a number of quite significant collections. So the Croft Lyons bequest had a mixture of Sheffield plate pewter, and it's about 900 pieces we collected then. So it's an incredibly varied collection, and most of it is online, so you can use our Explore the Collections thing to have a look. And of course it's there it's there for everybody to use if you're looking for inspiration from the past. And what's often amazing is you get so many times you see ideas about designing new objects now, particularly with things like 3D printing, and all they are doing is the same idea being expressed now as was expressed maybe 150 years ago or 300 years ago, but just expressed according to the culture in which it's produced. And as curators, that's something we try and identify a lot, is because it makes historic collections more relevant. If the same ideas are happening 300 years apart, it links us to the people that were producing these things. And you can see how the nature of society or the nature of technology and product design and that sort of thing influences. It's culturally and time dependent on how these things are expressed. There's no such thing as a new idea. And if you look up, it's very interesting to see Gabriella Bachelor's necklace upstairs. I looked at that straight away and I instantly thought Berlin ironwork from the early 19th century, where cast iron jewellery was being made in Berlin, and there was this huge aura around the technology. Again, which brings in sort of 3D printing. Do people buy for the technology, the aesthetic, the tradition? There are all these different mixes. So it is a big range of collection. A lot of stuff survives.
Robert Jenkins from Quest. You've talked quite a lot about the relationship between designer and production. I know very little about pewter. How much pewter making is done by craftspeople in doing both together rather than that sort of manufacturing relationship?
Well, most of the makers you can see downstairs today, and a lot of the ones exhibiting upstairs as well, will be designer makers. It's a growing trend, I'm pleased to say. There are maybe a dozen, maybe 2 dozen. I don't know them all. They don't always come out in the open. But there are plenty of them out there, which is great, to be honest, because the traditional model our model, if you like, of employing somebody to put the handles on, somebody to put the bases on, somebody to make the body, that model isn't sustainable and won't be around for much longer. We employ 20 odd people. The average age is something around 65. I'd bring the age down quite a lot.
4 years.
Well, for 3 or 4 years, yeah. So I think 50 years' time, pewter will be designer makers. It will be people making for themselves and promoting themselves and their own work and selling their own work, rather than it being the people making these things.
I think it is now, we are approaching the time for the prize giving. So if I could encourage you all to go upstairs, but not before we have said thank you to the 3 of you for a fascinating insight into pewter and design and all for your knowledge and passion in pewter. Thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome. Thank you.